let's have a look at some of the reactions so far. You're looking at social media, you're looking at the way people are kind of seeing the race play out. What do you got for us?
It's a really interesting part of the night, this, Mike, because for the most part, people are in their lane. What you'll find is that those people who are either sort of Democratic commentators or Republican commentators, or those people who are sort of running for Senate or are around the big machine, are calling those individual victories, for each party, essentially. So getting really excited about certain sort of certain counties in North Carolina. That's what the Democrats are currently really excited about. There are certain counties in Florida that the Republicans are really excited about, and everybody's sort of banging their own drum, really. So there's a hell of a lot of noise. One thing that is quite interesting, in the last sort of 15 minutes or so, Mitch McConnell, who is a big Trump sort of advocate, somebody who's a big part of Trump's base in the Senate, he's won his seat again. No major surprise there, but he's invoked Martin Luther King in his victory speech. He said that sort of he referred to Martin Luther King's March on Washington and having a dream, and the Democrats are getting understandably very annoyed about that.
That's their property.
As you can imagine, that's their lane, isn't it? Absolutely,
exactly.
That's their lane. The other thing as well that's quite interesting at this point is the fact that we still have several polls open, right? So we've seen Donald Trump Jr. tonight making a big sort of statement on his Twitter feed, and his Twitter feed is all about getting those people who are going to come out and vote Trump in places like Nevada, particularly. To get in line, because if you get in line, you can vote, even if it goes past.
Because there were some stories earlier tonight, weren't there, that people were standing in line for a while, particularly Republicans, and then kind of losing interest and just going home.
Off.
And I saw Seb Gorka was on Twitter saying, "Please stay there because this is really important. It's once in your life. Please just give up one day for the president."
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a couple of other really interesting points as well. This sort of like percentage possibility. A lot of these big aggregate polls, as we went into this night, had Donald Trump at about 10% to Joe Biden's 90%. Florida, if Florida does land in Trump's favour, it's a really interesting shift in the aggregate poll. It takes Trump's chances to about 33%, whereas alternatively, if he'd have lost Florida, it'd have been about -1 or so. So there's a really interesting shift there in how that changes the overall aggregate polling.
Because it is in fact possible, and we had this from Greg Swenson explaining exactly what was going on. We had the possibility that Trump could have just 48% of the electoral college, but that could be enough for him.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, yeah, completely. Those margins are so tight. They are so tight, and it's very hard to call. One of the things that I would certainly caution against at this point is, we've talked a lot about the way that the states are counting. So some of them are counting their in-person ballots first, some of them are counting their mail-in ballots first, some of them are going to have a lag. That means that you will get some places that will have a Democratic surge where perhaps that's a surprise. Democrats get really excited about it. Same thing for Republicans, a Trump surge in some places that will level out over the course of the evening or into tomorrow as well. So I think it's one of those you have to be cautious. I think caution.
Well, this is a very tight race, isn't it? I mean, it is one of those that can swing on a very small margin, really, because that percentage you've just talked about, which if he did get Florida, he takes it up to 30 odd. If he doesn't get it, he goes into the minus territory. I mean, it's an incredible. It's almost mind-boggling to try and get your head around exactly how that works.
Yeah, absolutely it is. Yeah, absolutely, and how those sort of individual things can swing it. I think one of the things that the Democrats are saying is that they're not hugely upset about the prospects of losing Florida. They know they still have plenty of paths to the White House for Joe Biden that involve Pennsylvania, that involve Ohio, that involve Michigan, where they feel they have a better chance perhaps than they did in Florida. But it's one thing is for certain: if it does fall for Trump in the next couple of hours, it's kept this race alive, which is good for us.
It's great for us. Well, listen, Darryl Morris is going to be here with us all night. He's got some amazing graphics, and he's got some incredible, gizmos in another room not too far away from here. He's going to go back there, and he's going to be looking at some more of the detail as the states come in, as the polls close. Right now, though, I'm delighted to say we're joined by Anthony Scaramucci, former White House press chief, who was in the White House just 3 years ago, 2017. A man rather like Donald Trump. Some people love him, some people hate him. He was described by Sebastian Gorka this morning on Sky News as a clown. Anthony, welcome to the greatest election show in the history of election shows. What do you make of it all so far?
Well, I mean, that was quite an introduction. So I don't know if I should thank you for the introduction or start crying, one or the other, but I appreciate the introduction. I think that it's a brilliant analysis by your team there. I think that there's many paths for the vice president. There's one path for President Trump, and it'll likely come down to Pennsylvania and Arizona. Remember, the president has to win both of those states, and then he also has to win North Carolina and Ohio. And I think that it should worry people, if you're in the Trump camp, how well the vice president is doing in the Midwestern suburbs. That's usually a tell for places like Pennsylvania, but we will see. I never thought that the Democrats were going to run the table, by the way, but I do still see a landslide electoral success for the vice president. A couple things will break his way likely in the next few hours.
I guess one of the difficult things in this election, Anthony, is the fact that so many votes have been placed with postal voting, and so many of those will take such a long time to count. I was saying earlier today there could conceivably be a conversation that takes place where Donald Trump, because of the voting that goes on today, suddenly declares himself to have won the election. And then the Democrats say, well, hang on, you can't say that. But he says, well, I can, and you're just cheating because you're holding back all these votes because you know they're all for me.
I know he's postured that. I know he's blustering that, but I see that as very unlikely. And the tell was this morning. He was 50 minutes late for that Fox and Friends interview. And it seems like some of the other people in the Republican leadership got to him and said, you can't do that. That's sort of presidential malpractice. And I think they scared him to the point where he was somewhat subdued on that interview. And he proceeded to let people know that he wasn't going to play games. And so even though he's a born liar, I take him at his word on that, because there's just too much at risk for him to do that. And remember, in his mindset right now, he's got a glimmer of hope because of Florida, but he's got lots of despair because of the other things that are going on that map right now. And I'll just point out to your listeners and viewers, he is underperforming 2016 right now. And so, to me, it doesn't look like he's going to win. And he knows that. And so therefore, he's got to be cautious, because he's going to need the vice president's help if he wants to untangle himself from all these legal issues that he has and these potential criminal investigations.
So tell us what went wrong between you and him, because it was only 3 years ago you were appointed, White House communications chief. You had a history with Obama and with Hillary Clinton. So, you might not be regarded as a traditional Republican as such, but you must have been a believer in the Trump methods and the Trump kind of, character. And yet now it's almost as though you're a sworn enemy.
Well, no, it's nothing personal to him. I was going to quip and say that it was Sebastian Gorka. He got in between the love affair between me and President Trump. But,
right.
No, listen, it's not even that. It's not personal. I got fired. I'm personally accountable for the way I got fired. I said something off color about Steve Bannon, which was, off color. But I think my assessment of Steve's personality and what he's like as a guy is very accurate. If you ask me about Sebastian, I'm happy to tell you what I think of him as well. But
since Trump, I quoted him as calling you a clown, I think you're entitled to come back on that.
Well, I mean, you see that's the stuff about Sebastian Gorka. He doesn't want to argue policy. He wants to make ad hominem attacks. And so, it would be impossible to debate a guy like that, because he'd be sitting there blubbering ad hominem attacks as opposed to talking about what's right or wrong for the United States. And so, to me, that's a little bit of self-projection by him, frankly, because I'm not interested in doing that. I don't do that to the president. I look at the president objectively, at least in my assessment, the 4 years of what he's done. After I got fired, I tried to stay loyal to him. You could look at the videotape. He's separating women from children. Can't say that that's good. He's disavowing our intelligence agencies in Helsinki in front of Vladimir Putin. Can't agree with that. He's then saying to the women who are known as the Squad in the United States, the 4 congresswomen, to go back to the countries that they originally came from, which is racism. It's just a racist nativist trope that they used on my grandparents, who were Italian American. I told Rudy Giuliani, who's a personal friend of mine, why are we accepting that type of behavior from the President of the United States? They said the same things to our grandparents, particularly your grandparents, Rudy. Rudy's made a decision that he wants to move his personal integrity in favor of Mr. Trump. I've made the decision that I don't want to do that. And lastly, and most critically, he's mishandled the pandemic. We have the pandemic raging in the United States, 25% of the world's deaths, 4% of the world's population. on a per capita basis, we're experiencing 620 million deaths per million. South Korea is 20 deaths per million. They got the disease on the same day as we did. And so for me, this is an objective assessment of what is going on. And my last point is that he is coming very hard at the institutions of our democracy. You're mentioning lawsuits. He's mentioned publicly that he may or may not accept the peaceful transfer of power. He's suggesting to people that the night's going to get rough, implying violence. This is sort of demagogic nonsense that should not be coming from the Oval Office. It should not be coming from the august institution of the American presidency. And
but
so,
if people, but Anthony, if people start running down Pennsylvania Avenue and throwing petrol bombs into shop windows, if that's what happens, you can't really blame the president for doing that. He's not the one throwing the petrol bombs.
Well, no, I think you have to study interwar Germany, and I think you have to look at what was going on in Italy in the 1930s. When leadership,
you're not going
like
to go
Mr.
down
Trump,
that road. Surely you're not going to say that Donald Trump is like a 1930s fascist, are you?
Well, he's got the early. Well, listen, he may not have early stage dementia, but he definitely has early stage fascism. I mean, he is right on the cusp of doing things. And remember, Hitler didn't go into full off kilter until 1937.
But this is why. Surely this is why, Anthony. Is this not why people who are moderate Democrats have looked at what the left is saying now and just say this is now getting ridiculous? It's hysterical. There's nothing fascist about a democratic president who's elected democratically and who might well be deselected and kicked out of the White House as a result of a democratic process. It's a nonsense, isn't it?
Well, look, we're going to disagree on that. I'll disagree with you respectfully. You can't talk like that in a leadership position like Mr. Trump is. You're denigrating democratic leaders around the world. You're praising despots and dictators around the world. You're trying to split and divide the country. You're sending out racist dog whistles on your Twitter feed that low-income housing is not going to enter your suburban neighborhood, which is a code word for blacks and Hispanics. No, we'll disagree on that.
A lot of Hispanics are voting for Donald Trump, though, aren't they? That's what's happening in Florida.
Well, I mean, so that you got to be very careful because now you're bunching every single person in the Hispanic community together. There are different sects.
Well, you
of
just
Hispanics,
said Hispanic,
like
so
there
I just
are
thought I
Welsh
would
and
use the same
Scottish,
word.
and there are.
Well, you just said
British.
Hispanic, so I don't know which Hispanics you meant.
No, I meant anybody that's brown or black in the United States. The president is suggesting on his Twitter feed that he's going to stop them from entering the white suburbs. And it's just as plain as day he's saying that. And that is a ridiculous statement to be making from the office of the presidency in 2020 in the United States. When the United States, as Lincoln said about it, was the last best hope for mankind. And with Martin Luther King, you just referenced him in Senator McConnell's acceptance speech, a little irony there. But, we should be judging people on the content of their character, not the color of their skin. And it's reprehensible. And so, yeah, it is early stage fascism. And so if he wins, I predict he won't win. If he wins, he'll do things to further subvert the democratic process, and he'll be doing things to challenge the legal system in the United States, which frankly is going to hurt the business community. You have to understand that the stability of the U.S. and that peaceful transfer of power and its democracy and the canon of Western law established, frankly, in the United Kingdom and brought to the United States, that common law has been the bedrock of commercial activity in the United States. And he's a disruptive force. He's like an orange wrecking ball, and he presents a systemic danger to our society and to the world. And so I have to speak out against them. Sebastian Gorka obviously could never defend this nonsense. He would just be spewing talking points, no reference points to history or anything like that. But this is a danger, and I'm proud to speak out against it.